I never thought that this would be the way I start my YouTube career, but hell, here we are. So, this is going to be a very serious story. No shenanigans, I promise. It's going to be a fun time for all of us.
Caillou's special vacation. It was a very special day for Caillou. The 4-year-old little boy was excited to be going on his first plane ride. It had been a special trip planned out by his mommy and daddy. He didn't know where they were going, but all he knew was that he was going to be taking a plane for the first time. He had never been on a plane before. He had played with his toy plane quite a lot, along with his teddy bear and Rexy, the dinosaur. But never did he think he'd actually fly on a plane. He had gone up early that morning in order to be on time. Going through TSA had been a very fun process for Caillou. The guards had been happy to explain to him what the special wands were for, as well as the body scanners. He bounced in his seat, kicking his feet happily as he remembered the conversation. Why is it that we have to go in these funny machines? Oh, you can thank the terrorists for that. You see, back before you were born in New York City, there were these 2 big towers, but some bad people flew some planes into them, and now we have to make sure that no one is carrying bombs with them. That's what these wands are for, to scan you and make sure you don't have explosives. Sir? I don't think that this is appropriate for you to tell him, his father had said, a frown on his face. The TSA agent merely shrugged. He's got to learn about 9/11 at some point, sir. Daddy, what's 9/11? Caillou didn't get an answer for that one, but perhaps they would when they hit their vacation spot. They'd be able to talk about it. He was sad because he didn't have his toys with him. They were in his suitcase, but his daddy had promised they'd be able to listen to music on the plane. Are you excited for our flight, Caillou? Oh yes, Mommy. I can't wait to see where we're going, he happily replied. His mother smiled as she bounced Rosie on her knee. You're going to have a lot of fun. Once we land, I'll tell you exactly where we're going, the brown-haired woman said. Ah, good. The flight hasn't left yet. Caillou's eyes lit up. Hearing the familiar voice of his grandfather, he jumped from his seat, hugging the man tightly. Grandpa, Grandma, you're here too? Of course, Caillou. This is a special trip. We wouldn't miss it for the world, the older woman said, giving him a smile. She dug into her purse, pulling out some chewing gum for him. Here you go. This will help you. When you go up into the air in the plane, your ears will become affected. Chewing gum helps you. Wow, thanks, Grandma, he cheered, taking the stick of chewing gum, quickly shoving it in his mouth. He was absolutely glowing. It wasn't long before their flight was called, and the boarding process had begun. As they were in first class, they had been able to get on the airplane first. It had been a hulking beast of an aircraft, a Boeing 747. The plane itself had 4 massive engines, which would allow it to travel quite fast. The flight crew greeted Caillou, who happily skipped into the plane. As they were being directed to their seats, Caillou's father tapped his shoulder, grabbing the attention. Would you like to see the cockpit? Can I? God damn it, stop laughing. Sure, I don't think they'd mind. Scooping his son into his arms, moving towards... Stop. Jesus. We haven't even gotten to the good part yet. Whew, alright. Sure, I don't think they'd mind, he said, scooping his son into his arms, moving forward toward the front of the plane. He spotted one of the pilots, the captain, and gave him a nod. Hello, Captain. Would you mind if Caillou here saw the cockpit? Not at all. Is this your first flight, Caillou? The man asked, earning a nod from the little boy. Yes, it is. I'm a little scared, but I know plane rides are fun, too. They can be, he said, gesturing to the cockpit, where the first officer was in the middle of his pre-flight check. Caillou looked around with wonder in his eyes. These here are what we call avionics. It's what helps us fly the plane. All these little buttons, knobs, and switches control a different part of the plane. Is flying a plane hard? It can be at first, but you have to practice. We need to train ourselves to fly a plane. It's a delicate process. But you're in safe hands. Why, flying a plane can be like driving a car. Believe it or not, Caillou, I wanted to be a pilot too, but I ended up getting quite busy, so I wasn't able to finish my course, his father said. Can you fly this plane, Daddy? Oh no, not a jet like this one. It would take years for me to learn how to fly one of these, the man said, hugging his son tightly. But it looks very fun. Captain, I need you to check these over. I don't know why, but something seems a little off, the first officer said, earning a nod from the captain. Well, folks, duty calls. Head back to your seats. Once we're in the air, I'll call you back so you can see us in action. It was nice meeting you, Caillou, the pilot said, giving the young boy a wave. He and his father made his way back to his seat, the captain pausing to take a look at the clipboard from the co-pilot. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. I don't know. Engine 4 has been giving us a bit of trouble. It was fine when we last landed. It should be fine to take off, but I'm a little nervous. Bah, foolish thoughts. We'll be fine. I've flown this plane countless times, and it has never failed me. But to ease your worries, let's go through the checks again. Caillou had returned to his seat. He was happy to see he had gotten the window seat. His father sat in the middle, while his mother sat at the end of the row, with Rosie in her lap. Caillou eagerly peered through the window, seeing the large wings and turbines. He gasped, pulling his father's sleeve as he looked outside. "Look, Daddy, that plane is taking off." "It is. That will be us in a few minutes. Make sure your seatbelt is buckled, all right, son?" the man said. Caillou nodded, checking his seatbelt, making sure it was firmly fastened in place. He tugged on the end of it, tightening it a bit. As the final passenger sat down, the crew began closing the doors. God damn it. As the pilots finished their pre-flight checks, they explained the safety features of the plane. Caillou was far too excited to pay attention. He jolted a bit while the plane began moving, beginning the taxiing procedure. He was completely entranced as their jet moved towards the runway. "Daddy, I'm scared," he said, making his dad chuckle. "It's alright, I'll hold your hand so you aren't scared," he said, grabbing the little boy's hand. Caillou felt a little better, keeping his focus on the tarmac. A few more minutes passed, and finally they were out on the runway. By now, Caillou was fully focused on the seat ahead of him. He squeezed his father's hand as he heard the engines growing louder. The plane started moving down the runway, getting faster and faster. Ever so gently, it started to lift up. Suddenly, a loud bang filled the plane. The whole vehicle started shaking before it fell down hard, tires screeching loudly. Everyone started to scream, including Caillou, who held onto his father tightly. The plane regained control as they reached the end of the runway, going through the large metal fence separating the tarmac from the outer fringes of the airport. Thankfully, the plane came to a stop. No one was hurt. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have had a catastrophic failure of our number 4 engine. In the next few minutes, we're going to deplane the aircraft. Please remain calm and listen to the instructions of the flight crew. Thank you." "Daddy, what's going on?" Caillou asked, a terrified look on his face. "Nothing, son. We're going to get off the plane. We're all right," he said, glancing at his wife, who was giving him a supportive smile. To her testament, Rosie had remained calm, though she was clearly confused as to what was going on. A loud hiss of the emergency exits being opened filled the fuselage, and, by order of the flight crew, people started moving out. Since they were in front of the emergency exit, Caillou's father guided him toward it. One of the stewards had opened it and stepped out into the wing, pulling out a large rolled-up bundle, which he was attempting to hook onto the side of the plane. "All right, everyone. We need to be careful here. Once the slide is deployed, you'll go down one at a time. Families with children, hold them tight as you go down, all right?" the man said, pulling the cord, the slide unfurling. Caillou looked around for a moment, his excitement from before returning. He looked forward toward the end of the wing, seeing the torrent of smoke coming from the engine. It was loud, and he could hardly hear what the others were saying. He finally noticed the engine was on fire, the turbine spinning slightly. Letting go of his father's hand, he slowly inched forward toward the end of the wing. He glanced back at the adults who were focused on going down the slide. More than anything, he moved over to the turbine, kneeling down in front of it. As he got close to the edge, he peered over it, seeing the spinning blades, eyes widening. "Oh wow, that's so cool," he cheerfully said, entranced by the engine. As he leaned forward for a better view, he ended up slipping. At that time, his father, who was looking around for him, noticed him, his eyes widening. "Caillou!" But it was too late. The little boy ended up falling, being sucked right into the turbine. It hissed loudly, his body shredded and torn apart. His father let out a scream as the engine exploded, sending chunks of bone and blood out the other end. His mother and Rosie, who were down on the ground, were bathed red, looks of shock on their faces. Several people were screaming and crying, some asking what had even happened. The brown-haired woman handed Rosie to her mother, moving forward, calling for her husband. The man peered over the edge, face soaked with tears. "What happened, Harold? Tell me what happened." "Caillou, he was leaning over the edge, the turbine." The woman's eyes widened. She raced through beneath the wing, seeing the engine was still smoking, blood and flesh coming out from it. She peered up, but couldn't see anything. As she looked over the edge of the engine, it let out a hiss, as if to cough up what it had greedily swallowed. She watched in horror as a tiny arm fell to the tarmac. She let out a scream, falling to her knees. "Caillou, my baby!" Caillou's father, Harold, had finally made it down from the wing, not wanting to look at the gruesome scene, as if the world wasn't cruel with him enough. A loud crack filled the air. He called his wife's name, and he looked up back at him, only to see the turbine beginning to fall. The heavily damaged turbine, after sucking up the little boy, gave way, crushing the woman alive. Harold let out a scream as the mangled engine swallowed his wife. A sickening crunch echoed through the runway as blood shot out from beneath the destroyed metal chassis. He raced towards the engine, which caught fire, hoping to rescue his wife, but all he saw was a mangled mess of metal, bone, and her arm jutting out from beneath the plane, fingers still twitching. Her diamond engagement ring glittered in the sunlight as her finger became still. He dropped to his knees, disbelief written on his face. What was supposed to be a fun family trip had turned into the greatest nightmare. A few days had passed, and Harold was now standing over the freshly laid graves of his wife and son. It had been hard having to face reality. His wife, Janet, had been crushed completely. They had to pry the engine apart to salvage her torso. It was a mangled piece of meat, hardly recognizable as a human being. Her head had remained attached to her body, somehow escaping the brunt of the damage. But the look of shock on her face would forever be etched into his mind. Her legs had been shredded. In the end, they had to have a closed casket for her wake. Caillou had been the same. The funeral home had offered him a coffin for his son, completely free, but when he saw it, he wondered if it was a cruel joke. Caillou's coffin was nothing more than the size of a house cat. His funeral home figured it would be better since only his arm had been recovered. He had put those men in their places, and in the end, Caillou had gotten a child-sized coffin, even if only his arm was in it. Why did this have to happen to him? He had spent months saving money for this trip to Florida. What was meant to be a fun family getaway to Disney turned into a nightmare. The rain continued battering him. He was a shell of his former self. A 5 o'clock shadow began growing on his face as the water dripped from his chin, tears mingling into it. He stared at the freshly laden dirt, placing a white rose on his wife's grave. "Will you be all right, Harold?" He looked at his father, an emotionless look on his face. The man nodded, frowning. "I shouldn't have asked." "Will you take Rosie for me? I need some time to myself, to think," the man said, earning a nod from his father. "Of course. We'll take care of her for as long as you need," the man said. Harold nodded, beginning his walk to his car. He opened the back seat, grabbing a small backpack he had prepared for his daughter. He reached inside his suit and pulled out an envelope, which he placed inside the backpack near the bottom of it. He handed it to his father, forcing a smile onto his face. "Everything she needs will be right here." "All right, don't be out for too long, all right? You know how Martha gets." Harold merely nodded, climbing into his car, not caring that he was soaked from the rain. The engine roared to life as he slowly pulled away, leaving the cemetery behind. For hours, he just drove around the city, not knowing where to go. He needed to be alone, to think, to grieve. If he had been paying attention, Caillou wouldn't have slipped away. He wouldn't have died. Such a cruel fate, being swallowed by a turbine. The pilot had explained that the engines weren't working appropriately. While doing checks to ensure that they had been turned off, the number 3 engine had turned on, sucking the young boy into it. It had been instantaneous. 1 second Caillou was there, the next he had been turned into ground beef. His son could be a brat, a pretentious child, a crybaby, but no 4-year-old deserved that fate. He'd never get to hold him again. He'd never go camping or chasing fireflies. They'd never go on a kayak or go fishing. He'd never go to school, learn to drive, have his first girlfriend. Everything was gone in an instant. And his wife, his beautiful wife Janet, the love of his life, she was gone just as quickly. He couldn't begin to imagine what she felt in those final moments. He only hoped she hadn't suffered in pain. He heard a ding, causing him to look at his dashboard, seeing he was almost all out of gas. He glanced to his left, seeing a gas station. He pulled into one of the pumps and stepped out of the vehicle. The rain had gotten worse. He ended up heading inside, a small line of people being at the counter. He moved toward the end of it, waiting for his turn. When it finally came, he looked at the cashier, a young man, likely in his early 20s, who had a bored look on his face. However, when he saw the look on Harold, he straightened up a bit. "How may I help you, sir?" 20 on pump 3. "Anything else?" the young man asked. Harold glanced past them, spotting several bottles of liquor, neatly stacked on the back. He nodded, glancing back at the cashier. "A bottle of Jack, and some Marlboro Long 100s, menthol." "Okay, that'll be $51.75, he said. Harold reached into his pocket for his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, and grabbed a paper bag and his cigarettes. "Keep the change for yourself." "Are you sure about that, sir?" "I don't give a shit." With that, Harold left, heading back to his car. After pumping his gas, he drove off, aimlessly driving through the city. By now it had begun getting dark. He heard his phone go off several times, but he decided not to answer it. Finally, after 2 hours of driving, he ended up on the mountain road towards a place that overlooked the city. He shut the engine off, reaching for his glove compartment for a tape. He put it in the player, playing it. The sweet sound of Michael Bolton filled the speakers as he leaned back, reaching for his cigarettes. He lit one up, taking a long drag from it, slowly exhaling as the music entered his mind. He grabbed his bottle of Jack, twisting the cap, taking a long drink from it, pausing to drag on a cigarette. Finally, the chorus hit, causing him to turn the music up. Tell me, how am I supposed to live without you? Now that I've been loving you so long, how am I supposed to live without you? And how am I supposed to carry on when all that I've been living for is gone? Harold started laughing, brushing away his tears as he took another swig of his whiskey. This had been his wife's favorite song. She adored Michael Bolton for whatever reason, but he never cared for it. He remembered when they met. They were high school sweethearts. They had come right to this cliff to stare out at the city. It had been where they kissed, where he proposed, where he lost his virginity to her. All while listening to this stupid song, he rolled the window down, pouring a bit of his Jack out the window, chuckling a bit. A drink for you, my love, and a drink for Caillou, even though he was an annoying little fucker. He continued to smoke, coughing as he inhaled the nicotine, all while chasing it with whiskey. He rewound the tape every time the song ended, laughing bitterly at the world before beginning to sob. He sobbed and sobbed, crying like a baby as he thought of his wife and son, both being cradled by the hands of God. He brushed his tears away, finishing the last of his whiskey, already very inebriated. He nodded to himself, turning the engine on. Putting his car in reverse, he started moving backward, almost hitting a giant boulder near the edge of the path. He put it into drive, his foot on the brake, taking his foot off the brake as he stared ahead. The music came from the speakers, that stupid chorus filling his mind. Tell me, how am I supposed to live without you? Now that I've been loving you so long, how am I supposed to live without you? And how am I supposed to carry on when all I've been living for is gone? Harold stepped on it, laughing like a maniac as he stared at the speedometer, the needle moving past the numbers, 20, 40, 60, 80, and finally, he made it to the edge of the cliff. He held onto the wheel tightly, closing his eyes as his vehicle careened forward, a serene smile on his face. I'm coming home, Janet. Caillou. He took his final breath as the car slammed to the bottom of the ravine, and within seconds it exploded into a ball of hellfire and metal. Bartholomew stared at his wife, Martha, with worry on his face. Rosie was asleep when he found the envelope and had read it, realizing it was his son's goodbyes. He had called the police immediately, while also dialing his cell phone, but nothing had come up. The man hadn't answered. Martha was becoming paranoid as she paced around the kitchen, clutching her pearl necklace in her grasp. What if he does something stupid, Bart? He's not. He's grieving. Our son isn't like that, he said. Suddenly, there came a knock at the door. Martha hurried toward it, opening it, eyes widening as she saw a pair of police officers standing outside. Is this the Johnson residence? Yes. Have you found my son? Please tell me he's all right, Martha said, only for an officer to frown, shaking his head. Ma'am, I regret to inform you that a vehicle matching the description of your son's car was located just west of town. The vehicle was found at the bottom of a rocky cliff. We tried doing what we could. We... Jesus. Oh. Oh. Oh my God, I held it in for so long. Okay. We're not sure if it's Harold or not. By the looks of things, we believe it may be. He ended up driving off the edge of a cliff. The car exploded, but miraculously the driver hadn't been consumed by the flames, which is why we need you both to come. Bartholomew nodded, turning to his wife. Stay here and take care of Rosie, alright? I'll be back. I'm sure it wasn't him. Don't lie to me, Bart. Just come back, okay? She said. The man nodded, grabbing his coat and hat, leaving the house. Bartholomew and Martha stood in front of their son's grave, having buried him in the same plot as his wife. The two stared at the tombstone. It had the names of all three, Harold, Janet, and Caillou, their smiling faces visible on the pictures attached to their nameplates. Martha stared, sobbing again, as Rosie hugged her grandfather tightly. Grandpa, where's Mommy and Daddy? And Caillou? Sweetheart, your Mommy and Daddy, they're in heaven, and so is Caillou. You are too young to understand, but you will in time. They aren't with us anymore. Where's heaven? The man merely looked up, pointing at the clouds. Up there. That's where heaven is. Can we go? We can take a plane. I like planes. Rosie, we are never stepping on another fucking plane again, the old man said, hugging his granddaughter tightly. Can't afford to lose you too. Let's go home. Martha silently followed behind her husband, briefly glancing back at the tombstone. The picture of Caillou would haunt her in her dreams. His smiling face was something she'd never see again. All she could think about was the bloody spray of his flesh and bones. That was all she could think about. She would never travel on a plane again. He'd never get to be a big boy. His dreams were forever abandoned. 1 year after what had happened, Bartholomew and Martha won a settlement. They had been granted $21.5 million for the accident that had taken the lives of Caillou and his mother. $3 million had been set aside for Rosie's college fund, as well as another $5 million for her personal use when she was of age. The plane, which had taken the lives of Caillou and his mother, was quietly decommissioned. However, it would find a new life after it was purchased by the United States government. Currently, it is serving the President of the United States as Air Force One. Former President Donald Trump would attest to hearing the cries of a child during flights abroad, but he would just tune them out. Current President Joe Biden has offered the ghost ice cream, but it's a ghost, so it obviously didn't accept it. He would later be tripped by Caillou's spirit, falling down the stairs, scaring the Secret Service, but as if he was made of jelly, he bounced back and continued leading a once glorious nation into ruin. To this day, that video makes President Putin giggle like a schoolgirl. Fuck. Oh, fuck. Get serious, damn it. I'm fucking crying. Okay. Alright, calm down, man. Calm down, just breathe. Bartholomew would end up becoming a gambling addict, getting a thrill every time he won the big jackpot, only to get overconfident and lose it all. Having gone into debt, he ended up making a deal with a loan shark to pay off his debts. But when it came to time to collect, he had no money. He was kidnapped and taken to the Don of the Mafia. In order to square his debt, he had to become a mule. Bartholomew would end up being caught up in an investigation which was tied back to a drug smuggling ring out of Colombia. As he tried to run, he was shot by DEA agents. He had 14 grams of uncut Colombian cocaine in his pockets when he was murdered. Hearing about what her husband had been doing, Martha became distraught. She had been questioned by the FBI, but she hadn't been involved in anything. One day, when Rosie was in school, she decided to visit her son's grave. As she was about to leave, the Don's goons came to square the debt Bartholomew had left behind. Having no way of paying, Martha paid with the only thing she had left, her life. She was found dead on top of her son, daughter-in-law's, and her grandson's grave. Interestingly enough, all of the bullet wounds found on her body were located in her chest and face, which meant she didn't turn away from her assassins and had met her fate with open arms. Rosie would be put into foster care, where she would end up being bounced around from home to home. At the age of 11, she would run away, never to be seen again. She would later reappear at the age of 18 as a famous teen pop idol who went by the name of Alexis Texas. She began doing porn at the age of 21, and her most infamous video involved her snorting crack from Kanye West's ass crack. After a messy divorce with Nickelback frontman Chad Kroeger, she began traveling the world on a personal mission to ride 1,000 cocks before she died. Her most famous piece of film is titled Backdoor Sluts 9, which according to sources makes Crotch Capers 3 look like Naughty Nurses 2. She attains the world record for the longest train run on a single woman in a single night, with 569 dicks. She also has the current world record for swallowing the largest cum shot in the world, consisting of ejaculate of 500 different men. She starred in a famous piece of pornography, Star Trek, To Boldly Come Where No Man Has Come Before. Her debut role was in a Scooby-Doo parody where a man dressed like a dog took her virginity. She is currently 34 years old and addicted to heroin.
So yes, I hope you enjoyed the story. I was going to edit it, but, I decided not to do that. It was way too hilarious for me just to cut it up. And, it's not a serious story, so why the hell not? But anyway, yes, this is me. Hope you like it. I've been meaning to do this for a while, but hey, sometimes you end up stumbling onto a story that's so funny that you just need to spread it around to as many people as possible. So I hope you liked it. I don't know when my next upload will be, so have fun. Enjoy Halloween. Uh, Spooky, because apparently that pisses people off. Alright, that's about it. I don't have anything else. Follow me on Twitter at Cosmic Espeon. I don't post anything on there, but you might see some cringe, so. Okay, thanks, bye.